The transmission stopped abruptly. There was no warning, no distress call, not even a system error. Just silence. New Aurora, the largest colony on Mars, vanished from communication as if it were a star extinguished in the night sky. From the control center on Earth, satellite images showed the colony intact. Lights on, agricultural drones in operation, climate-controlled domes. But no response came from its inhabitants. Humanity, once proud of its conquest of the unknown, now faced a mystery that defied understanding. The rescue mission was organized in record time. The crew of the Audacity was small but experienced. Anika Yates, a linguist and expert in alien patterns, felt an overwhelming weight. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a confrontation with the unknown. Commander Marcus Venn, a veteran hardened by prior missions, maintained his leadership stance, but his eyes betrayed something deeper. He had faced the inexplicable before. Biologist Elias Kale, on the other hand, was obsessed with the scientific possibilities. To him, New Aurora was more than a tragedy. It was an opportunity. When the Audacity landed on the surface of Mars, the silence seemed almost alive. The reddish dust covered the colony's buildings, but everything remained functional. Plants thrived in the greenhouses. Drones cleaned the hallways as if nothing had happened. And yet, there was no one. Every step the team took echoed within the domes, and the air felt heavy, charged with something no instrument could measure. The feeling of being watched was inescapable, even when monitors registered no anomalies. In the central quarters, surveillance footage revealed a disturbing scene. The colonists were going about their daily routines, preparing meals, cleaning the quarters, laughing in groups, when suddenly, everyone stopped. Their heads lifted, as though they had heard something. Seconds later, they vanished. There was no panic, no chaos, just emptiness. Anika averted her gaze from the screen, feeling a pressure in her head. "It's as if they were summoned," she said, breaking the silence. Marcus, ever pragmatic, focused on finding answers, while Kale analyzed biological samples and Anika tried to decipher patterns in the interrupted transmissions. He found a journal in a scientist's quarters. The last entries mentioned unsettling dreams and sounds coming from beneath the surface. Something is down there, something that was never meant to be found. That night, as the Martian wind whispered softly through the empty domes, the first sounds began. A whisper, low and constant, emanating from the depths. The team began their exploration by dividing tasks. Marcus led the inspection of security cameras and main systems. Anika headed to the communications hub, while Kale ventured to the laboratories and greenhouses, hoping to find biological records or clues to explain the events. Each step they took on the colony's deserted streets seemed to echo endlessly, as though the very place rejected human presence. Mars, always hostile, now felt more alien than ever. Marcus analyzed the surveillance footage. The scene of the colonists disappearing remained unchanged, but he noticed something previously overlooked. Faint flashes of light, almost imperceptible, occurred moments before the disappearance. It was as if reality had been scratched during those seconds. He enhanced the resolution and attempted to isolate the event, but the system simply froze. "It's like something doesn't want to be seen," he muttered, the unease growing within him. At the communications hub, Anika faced her own challenges. The system seemed sabotaged, but not by human hands. Older messages were corrupted, overlaid with sound patterns that defied earthly logic. Yet there was something familiar about them. "This isn't static," she said as she activated a specific frequency. The sound filled the room, a deep, rhythmic echo, almost like breathing. At the end of the transmission, a hoarse, distorted voice whispered, "You've already heard." Anika turned off the system, but the sound seemed to echo in her mind long after it had faded. Meanwhile, Kale was intrigued by the pristine state of the greenhouse crops. The plants, genetically adapted for Mars, were growing faster and healthier than predicted. There was something in the soil, something he had never seen before. As he collected a sample, he noticed the particles faintly glowing under ultraviolet light. He recorded his findings, but an unsettling sensation gnawed at him. The glow seemed to pulse in rhythm with the sound Anika had heard. The team gathered at the control center by nightfall to share their discoveries. The whisper Anika had captured now seemed omnipresent, as though it emanated from the very air. Marcus tried to stay focused, emphasizing that the colony's systems showed no signs of attack or malfunction. There are no invaders, no bodies. It's as if they were erased, he concluded. But Anika disagreed. They weren't erased. They were taken. Suspicious, Marcus suggested they investigate the underground tunnels mentioned in the journal. Anika hesitated. Something inside her screamed not to go, but Kale was too curious to ignore it. He argued that if something of value was there, they couldn't return to Earth without answers. Marcus agreed but made it clear that any sign of danger would mean an immediate retreat. "We're not risking our lives over speculation," he said, though his tone betrayed his apprehension. That night, as the group rested, the dreams began. Anika saw flashes of a hooded figure walking across a vast red desert, accompanied by something that was not human, yet not entirely alien. Kale dreamed of an underground city glowing like a beacon in the darkness, while Marcus confronted an absolute void, where his own voice echoed infinitely. When they awoke, they knew something had changed. The whisper, now louder, felt like an invitation or a warning. Access to the underground tunnels was far too easy. The security door, which should have been sealed, was slightly ajar, as if someone or something had gone down before them. The narrow corridor was dimly lit by faint light panels powered by self-sustaining energy systems, but the air was thick with humidity and a strange electricity that made their skin tingle. Marcus led the way with Anika close behind. Kale, ever observant, paused every few meters to examine the walls. "This isn't concrete. It feels organic," he murmured, touching a material that seemed to absorb the light. As they moved forward, the sounds they had heard on the surface began to change. No longer just whispers, the noises became rhythmic, almost like a distant heartbeat. Anika activated her decoding equipment and started recording. "This isn't just noise," she said, watching the frequency graphs. "It's a language, but we can't understand it." Yet, Marcus nodded in response but was visibly tense. There was something about the sounds that seemed to affect him personally. After a few more meters, they came to a fork in the tunnel. On the ground, boot prints indicated the colonists had been there. Marcus led the group down the more worn path, but Anika hesitated. "Something's wrong," she said, pointing at the marks. "Why do they stop so abruptly? It's like they were interrupted." Marcus ignored the comment, determined to move forward, though Kale made a mental note of the detail. At the end of the corridor, they reached an open, expansive chamber. The air was heavier here, and the sound seemed to come from everywhere, like an endless echo. In the center of the room stood an artifact, almost like an obelisk, pulsing with a faint, irregular light. It was made of an unknown material, a blend of metal and something that seemed alive. Near the artifact were colonists' equipment, scanners, tools, even digital journals, abandoned as if they had fled in haste. Yet, there were no signs of a struggle. Kale cautiously approached the artifact and noticed symbols etched into its surface. "These patterns," he said, examining them closely, "they're not just decorative. They're changing, adapting." Before he could finish, the artifact emitted a pulse of energy that shut down all the lights and disabled their suit systems. For a few seconds, everything went dark. When the power returned, the artifact was still, but something in the environment had shifted. Anika noticed it first. The sound was now inside their heads. "This isn't natural. It's like it's trying to communicate something," Anika said, almost entranced. She attempted to decipher the patterns, but the sounds triggered visions. Flashes of human figures, some familiar, others unknown, appeared in her mind. There were also massive structures floating in vast voids and a persistent sensation of being observed by something beyond comprehension. Kale experienced similar visions, but Marcus remained silent, as though he were actively resisting the intrusion. As they tried to distance themselves from the artifact, one of the nearby digital journals powered on by itself, displaying a message in text. It was the final entry from one of the colony's scientists. "It's older than we imagined. It's not a tool. It's an entity. And now that we've activated it, there's no turning back. The chamber trembled slightly, as if something was moving in the surrounding tunnels. Marcus gave the order to retreat, but the way back felt longer, darker, and far more dangerous. The journey back became an escalating test of nerves. The pulsating sound now seemed to follow the team, like a living echo drawing closer with every step. Their suit lights flickered, and sensors picked up movements around them, though nothing visible appeared. Marcus remained at the front, his hand gripping his weapon, even without a defined target. "It's not just the artifact. This entire place is alive," Kale said, staring at the walls, which now seemed to writhe faintly under the dim lighting. They reached another chamber, larger than the previous one. The air was thicker, and the heat was almost suffocating. At the center stood a second artifact, projecting holographic images that filled the room like a web of light. The images depicted unknown planets, humanoid figures, and colossal structures floating in impossible spaces. Marcus advanced cautiously, but Anika froze, staring at one of the projections. "These people, they're watching us," she said as a holographic figure seemed to look directly at her. Kale approached the artifact, but before he could touch the projection, an invisible force knocked him down. "It's reacting to us," he said, clutching his head as he tried to stand. The artifact seemed conscious, adjusting the intensity of its holograms as the three moved closer or farther away. Marcus attempted to analyze the floating symbols, but Anika noticed something he hadn't. Among the holograms, familiar faces appeared. Those of the colonists from New Aurora. One of the projections began emitting clearer sounds, almost like a voice attempting to form words. Anika, using her equipment, adjusted the frequency and managed to capture part of the message. "They called us. Now we are one with the whole." The phrase repeated several times before the holograms abruptly disappeared. The artifact fell still, but a deep rumble echoed through the tunnels, as if something massive was stirring in the depths. Marcus insisted they press on. "Whatever this is, we're at the center of it. We need to understand." Anika hesitated but knew the information was too critical to abandon. However, Kale began to show increasing signs of distress. He was pale and sweating, as if something was affecting him more than the others. I see them," he murmured, clutching his head. Anika tried to help him, but Marcus interrupted. "We don't have time to stop. We need to keep moving." As they entered the next corridor, the temperature dropped sharply. A dense mist covered the ground, and the walls seemed to pulse in sync with the ever-present sound. Then the artifact emitted another pulse, far stronger than before. Anika and Marcus were knocked to the ground, but Kale was hit directly by the energy. He screamed, his body convulsing for a few seconds before vanishing entirely, as though erased from reality. Where he had stood, only a faint shadow remained on the ground, which quickly faded. Anika was in shock, but Marcus grabbed her arm and pulled her forward. "We can't stay here." The sound around them shifted, becoming nearly deafening. They ran, guided by a faint light at the end of the tunnel, but they knew the artifact had marked them. The visions grew more intense, and Anika began to realize that the flashes she saw weren't just memories or hallucinations. They were fragments of a larger message, a puzzle she had yet to solve. The light at the end of the tunnel led them to a space that felt untouched, almost sacred. It was a colossal chamber, far larger than anything they had seen before, with smooth, luminous walls made of a translucent material. At the center, a third artifact floated, spinning slowly and casting patterns of light across the chamber. Unlike the others, it didn't pulse or emit sounds. It was silent, yet its presence was overwhelming. Marcus stopped at the entrance, as if resisting something invisible. "I feel like I'm being watched by something immense," he said. Anika stepped forward cautiously, her mind overwhelmed by increasingly vivid visions. She saw an alien city, vast crystal domes surrounded by endless deserts. Humanoid figures moved among floating towers, but their faces unsettled her. They were void of emotion, as though they had abandoned all individuality. "They didn't disappear," she said, her voice barely audible. "They were assimilated Marcus ignored her and began inspecting the artifact. His eyes were fixed on the patterns of light, as if he were trying to decipher them. Anika noticed something strange about him. He seemed disconnected, almost entranced. "Marcus, we need to leave now," she urged, but he didn't respond. Instead, he mumbled something inaudible and moved closer to the artifact. She grabbed his arm, trying to pull him away, but he shoved her back. "This isn't what you think," he said. "It's not an enemy. It's a portal, a path." As Marcus approached the artifact, the projections began to shift. This time, they displayed images of the team members themselves. First, Kale, standing in a red desert beside a monolithic structure. Then Harris, the crew member who had disappeared earlier, floating in an empty void. Finally, Anika and Marcus, both staring into an intense light that seemed to consume them. Anika's heart raced as a message started to take shape in the artifact's patterns. "You are next?" Marcus fell to his knees, clutching his head as if battling something within. Anika tried to pull him back, but the holograms intensified, enveloping them in a web of light. A deep, reverberating voice echoed through the chamber. "Choose." Anika stepped back, trying to understand what it meant, but Marcus seemed to have already made his decision. He looked at her with a strange, almost serene smile. "Maybe this is what we've been searching for all along," he said before stepping forward. When Marcus touched the artifact, the chamber exploded with light. Anika was thrown backward, her ears ringing with a sound that was a blend of screams and music. When she managed to open her eyes, Marcus was gone, as were the holograms. The artifact was inert, and the chamber felt different, darker, emptier. She called out his name, but her voice was swallowed by the silence. For the first time since they arrived at the colony, the pulsating sound was completely gone. Anika stood there, alone, staring at the lifeless artifact, feeling a mix of despair and understanding. One thing was clear to her now. The artifact wasn't a weapon or an ordinary machine. It was a catalyst, a bridge between realities. It didn't destroy people, it transformed them, taking them to something greater. But what was that? She didn't know, and perhaps never would. The only path left was to return to the surface and bring back the evidence of what she had witnessed, even if no one believed her. Anika stumbled through the tunnels, clutching the data she had managed to save on one of the team's devices. The silence, once oppressive, now felt deafening. The sensation of being watched lingered, but now she was alone. Each step echoed unnaturally through the corridors as her mind wavered between visions and reality. The faces of the colonists and her team flashed in her thoughts, fragments of a puzzle she couldn't piece together. When she finally emerged onto the colony's surface, the weak Martian sun bathed the empty domes in light. The sense of desolation was even greater now. The streets were exactly as they had been when the team first arrived, but Anika saw the place with a new perspective. It was as if New Aurora had never been just a colony but part of something far larger, a meeting point between worlds. She looked up at the sky, trying to grasp what had truly happened, but no answers came. Inside the central quarters, Anika activated the few remaining systems that still functioned. She needed to contact Earth, but the communications were still unstable, as if the very space around the colony had been altered. While waiting, she reviewed the data she had collected. The readings from the artifact were impossibly complex, blending biological and technological patterns. There was also a residual frequency message she hadn't noticed before. The choice is theirs. You only open the way. Contact with Earth was re-established intermittently. She sent an initial report but omitted the more fantastical details. She knew no one would believe her. Team lost. Colony intact. Returning with data for analysis, she transmitted. However, part of her knew the mission wasn't truly over. The artifact remained active, even after everything that had transpired. There was no doubt others would be drawn to it. Just as the colony itself had been called, the return to the Audacity was somber. The once lively cabins, filled with conversations and plans, were now empty and silent. Anika recorded a full report, detailing the visions, the disappearances, and what she believed to be the artifact's true nature. It's not a weapon, but it's not a gift either. It's a threshold. Whatever lies on the other side isn't something we can comprehend or control. Her words carried emotion, but her expression remained resolute. As the ship launched and left Mars behind, Anika gazed out the window, watching the red planet shrink slowly into the distance. She felt a mix of relief and anguish. Relief at having survived, and anguish knowing that Marcus and the others had crossed into an unknown fate. Yet the silence of Mars seemed to convey something more. The story wasn't over. The artifact would remain, waiting, calling. The story concludes with Anika back on Earth, delivering the data to the authorities. Scientists begin analyzing the information, and leaders debate the next steps. In a closed meeting, someone suggests sending a new team to delve deeper into the tunnels. Watching from afar, Anika shivers. In her mind, a new message resonates like a whisper. You still don't understand. Upon returning to Earth, Anika became the center of a frenzy of scientific, political, and philosophical debates. The data she brought back from the colony was studied for weeks, but the analyses only deepened the mystery. There was no consensus. Some saw the artifact as an opportunity for unimaginable advancements, while others believed it represented an existential risk. The most critical voices warned, humanity is not ready to understand the unknown. Every attempt only leads us to lose more than we gain. Anika, isolated after the debriefings, couldn't shake the visions that haunted her. In the quietest nights, she heard echoes of the sounds the artifact had emitted, and images of Marcus and Kale returned as persistent shadows in her mind. There was something incomplete about it all, something that made her question whether she had truly escaped, or if she had merely been spared, for now. She felt the artifact was still connected to her, like a door that had never been fully closed. Meanwhile, the discovery of the colony and the artifact sparked growing fervor across the world. Protests erupted against space exploration, while corporations and governments prepared secret missions to investigate further. Public debate revolved around a single question: should we advance or retreat? The answer seemed divided, but Anika knew that, regardless of the decision, something had already changed. Humanity, having touched the unknown, could never be the same again. Months later, during a restless sleep, Anika awoke with a chilling clarity. In her visions, the humans who had disappeared were not victims but part of something greater. They were neither dead nor lost, they had been transformed. But the transformation wasn't a personal choice. It was an imposition by something that operated beyond the limits of human understanding. They called us because they already knew what we were. The next step is not ours to decide. The words echoed in her mind, sending a shiver through her body. In the final scene, Anika stood by the window of a research facility, watching as a spacecraft launched toward Mars on a new mission. She knew she couldn't stop it, but the weight of what was to come was crushing. As the ship disappeared over the horizon, her communicator vibrated. A cryptic message had arrived directly to her personal device. It was brief but clear: "You will hear again." Anika closed her eyes, realizing that the story that had begun in New Aurora was far from over. Not for her, and not for humanity.